Good morning, everyone. Now, the title of the presentation, as the Colonel mentioned, is exactly that. This concept of zero trust network access, and how do I apply it to all users of the network. But for you vintage Woody Allen movie fans, it's also everything you wanted to know about it, but were afraid to ask. And I put it in that context because zero trust is one of those things we ask ourselves, what is it? Is it a concept? Okay. Is it a strategy? How do I go about and take a concept and put it into reality? Are there projects or are there other pieces that go around it, or is it a technology? The problem is it's all of those things. Now I'm going to start at the bottom of the pyramid and talk about a specific technology, because I think once this thing, zero trust network access, first came about, and for those of you with a little bit of memory, Gartner was first calling it, if I remember correctly, SDP, Software Defined Perimeter, as part of their SASE pronouncement. But really, it's been renamed, and it's much more appropriate now talking about it as a zero trust technology, and it really is a foundational technology that can be deployed fairly reasonably and fairly straightforward. It's also something very tangible. Now, what's driven this? I've mentioned a couple of terms such as SASE, which was 2019, which kind of drove a lot of the hysteria about this and about how are we changing convergence of networking and security. Well, during those 3 years since that pronouncement, we've seen things change. Certainly the work from home to where we are today, a hybrid working model of working from anywhere. The cloud will always be with us. Unfortunately, so will the threats that go about it. So this is what's really driving it. The question is, how do you get it? How do you do it? How do you implement it? Because, and the reason I bring this up, because Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA, really has become associated with SASE. If you want ZTNA, you have to have SASE. Well, yes, that is a way you can get it, but it's not the only way that you can deploy it. So if I look at it here, a network-based implementation, it's really made up of 3 separate technologies working in tandem. The client sitting at the desktop, which can be a standalone client or a functionality incorporated into something you already have. That client's responsible for setting up the secure connections to the applications. You have an application gateway that's controlling access to those different applications, whether they be in a private or a public cloud. And then finally, you have a policy engine. And these 3 things work together to fulfill the capabilities of ZTNA and making sure that the user is only allowed access to the applications that the policy says that they can access, and making sure as they switch from application to application that same authentication, the same verification process is repeated over and over again. Now, this is not a concept. This is reality. And in fact, if you'll forgive me for a second, this is how Fortinet has implemented ZTNA for its 10,000 plus employees around the world. So proof of the pudding, putting our money where our mouth is, we are all in, and I'm sure there's some other euphemisms I can use here. I know this works from firsthand experience. I'm a road warrior. I have been for a number of years. I no longer have to think about, got to get my VPN up and running before I can access particular applications. So last night when I arrived, getting back to work, going ahead and logging in, I'm off the network. So now when I go to applications, not only am I going through the Zero Trust Network Access verification, it's also married to multi-factor authentication because I am off network. Yesterday morning I was in the office, going to those same applications, going through the same verification, but because I was on network, multi-factor authentication wasn't necessary. So this is the real value of ZTNA. Being able to follow me wherever I am, making sure that the right policies are being applied, and I have consistent policy, consistent security, no matter where I am. But as I said in the beginning, ZTNA has become associated with SASE. And for most people, this is the way they're consuming it. And again, looking at the Gartner definition of this, that I've got this thing, and now it's been defined a little bit, this Security Services Edge, or SSE, this is where all my different security services are located with a particular SASE provider, and I don't really care which one you're talking about. But ZTNA is one of those leading services that can be enabled. Now, in theory, it works for fixed locations as well. I'm of the opinion it's more of a kludge than an actual graceful technology in this particular case, but people are using it. But the question comes up, and this was a great quote from a Gartner paper. This particular person that was interviewed, they loved the ZTNA that they were getting from their SASE provider, and he asked the logical question, why can't I get it for all of my users? The answer is quite simple, because in an on-campus environment, generally it's a mix of different vendors. And getting those vendors to play together, trying to get consistent policy across all of those different pieces. And this is what Gartner calls universal ZTNA. The value of the technology should be available to every user of the network, not just when they're working remotely and then not having it when they're on network. It should be consistent and universal for them. So if I look at the two of them, I have Mr. Purple and Mrs. Red. They're both working remotely on this particular day. They connect up through the SASE vendor, whichever one it is. That's great. They have the value of ZTNA. But tomorrow, when Mrs. Red goes back to the office, now they're falling back into the more traditional endpoint protection profile. And this is causing a conflict because I'm missing the consistency that's tied to my location. So what I want to do, the first step into applying universal ZTNA here is to look at what's going on in the campus. And this is, I mentioned briefly before, this idea of converging security and networking. Technologies that have coexist, but have always been separate entities. And we've been talking about this for a few years now, of converging them together. So you're creating something new. You're creating something that delivers the value and the capabilities of both half of the equation, both the networking side as well as the security side. By doing that, I eliminate those barriers. I bring together the different networking and security technologies so that now I can go ahead and implement ZTNA in my on-campus world. So no matter where you are, working off campus, working on campus, you get the same capabilities. However, the question is, I'm still dealing with two different instances of ZTNA. It's made my life a lot simpler, but there's still configuration. There's still a little bit of complexity that I want to get rid of. And this is what Gartner means when they're talking about talking about universal ZTNA. This idea that I choose my security vendors correctly. My SASE provider has the ability to interact with my on-campus world so that now, no matter where I am, I have consistent policy, consistent security, and consistent management, and a single ZTNA policy no matter where I am, off campus or on campus. That's the promise of ZTNA, of universal ZTNA. And that's what, in the booth, if you have a chance to come into the Tech Expo, please come by. We're more than happy to talk about it, explain how we at Fortinet are delivering this. So to wrap this up, Zero Trust Network Access, it really is the first time that Zero Trust has become tangible. Before, we're talking about concepts, something you can't get your hands around. With ZTNA, it's relatively simple to see what its value is, to understand how to deliver it. Now that we've gotten past that initial obstacle, how do we deliver it to everybody in the network? Thank you very much.